Happy Easter!
Happy Easter!
Please be seated. You know what's making me proud to be a Christian right now? Jesus. I'm serious. I just love the guy, especially the Jesus portrayed in Luke, who we hear about today. Our gospel talks about the women remembering Jesus, and I want to take us through a little bit of collective remembering of Luke's Jesus. And then I want to move on to what's giving me hope right now, which is some wisdom from our ancestors. For my money, Luke's Jesus is kind of the best. He's not sullen Jesus or disembodied ghost Jesus. For one thing, he is always part of a we. He is surrounded by and working with people of every age and gender from the time he's born to the moment of his resurrection and reappearance. In Luke, people weep for Jesus, and they offer to help him carry his cross. They pitch in to give him a proper burial. Luke's Jesus has no cry of abandonment or forsakenment. He makes friends right up until the end, and even yes-ands a new friend's request for forgiveness to say, you'll be with me in paradise. And he's generous. When Judas betrays him, Luke's narrator explains, Satan entered him. Satan had disappeared from tempting Jesus in the wilderness until an opportune time, and this was an opportune time. He doesn't smote Judas or disappear him. In fact, when some of Jesus' followers injure a servant of the high priest who has come to arrest Jesus, Jesus stops the whole shebang and heals the guy's right ear and then concedes to arrest. And in Luke's version, Jesus watches Peter betray him 3 times in the garden. And he's hurt, but he doesn't punish Peter. In fact, he goes on to trust Peter with starting the whole church. And when there's a dispute at the Last Supper about who is the greatest of all-time follower, Jesus refuses to choose a favorite and instead praises them for their fidelity. And gilding the lily, Luke throws in this detail that at the trial, Pilate and Herod became friends, and that was a good thing. And just like at the beginning of Lent, when Jesus goes into the wilderness with Satan and Satan invites Jesus to save himself, Jesus refuses to use his power to defy the courts or to take himself down off the cross. And he isn't kind and generous because he's a doofus. He knows what's going to happen. Luke's Jesus weeps for Jerusalem. And back a few chapters, there's something of a high point of the Gospel of Luke that takes place in a town called Jericho, where a rich man named Zacchaeus agrees to give half his assets away to the poor and to restore anyone who he has defrauded. And Jesus and the crowd are so happy. But then immediately, Jesus breaks into a parable about when the kingdom is going to come, because it says he was near Jerusalem, and his followers, his listeners, supposed that the kingdom was going to appear immediately. Jesus knows that what happened in Jericho with Zacchaeus wouldn't alter Jerusalem. It's like that bit in Deuteronomy where Moses looks out over the promised land after leading the Israelites for 40 years, but knows he's not going to enter it. And then Jesus willingly gives up his spirit. And that Jesus, that divine sovereign, makes me proud to call myself a Christian. But what gives me hope as a Christian isn't the part that leads up to the crucifixion or the crucifixion itself, but what comes next. See, it's easy for me to get stuck on the cross, the symbol of state-sanctioned execution and fear, of death. And when night arrives in the middle of the day and it's too loud and no one knows what to do with themselves. And God is with us in the fear and the loss right there. And maybe in the community that loved him, the crowds witnessing the execution, they experienced what Judith Butler said, that loss makes a tenuous we out of all of us. But that we was tenuous. And as Justo Gonzalez says, the story of the resurrection is threatened if the cross is the end of the story. What made a we out of Jesus' friends is what came next. When they arrived at the tomb to anoint the body and give him a proper burial, the body wasn't there. And the two figures tell his friends, remember. And maybe they remembered the last meal where they had together. And he said, let the greatest among you be the youngest and the leader as one who serves. Or what Garth preached about in unconditional love, or Rick in serving, or Will about collective jailbreak. But whatever it is, they centered down, as Howard Thurman says, and remembered. And that afternoon, Jesus will appear just for a bit to answer any immediate questions before he ascends and sends them into the world. And in that process, the God who made dirt and daffodils and subatomic particles and made you out of stardust, that God conquered fear and death. And we became not just a community of pain, but one united in what Julia Esquivel de Velázquez calls the marathon of hope. Esquivel de Velázquez says that this hope cannot be taken away once you know of the resurrection. She wrote, they have threatened us with resurrection because we have felt their inert bodies and their souls penetrated ours doubly fortified. Because in this marathon of hope, there are always others to relieve us, to carry the strength to reach the finish line, which lies beyond death. Now, I'm half Greek, so my ancestors taught me the story of the first marathon, where a runner ran 26.2 miles from the battlefield back to Athens and promptly died. And I don't want to expedite my face-to-face with Jesus, but my beloved did not grow up with the same ancestor wisdom. He's very fair, so I get to cheer him on at marathons. And I don't know if you've ever been part of a cheering squad at a marathon, but it's not like a professional soccer game where you can learn to swear in any language of the globe. It is uniformly positive. It is a party. There are cowbells and signs and people doing the little two-fingered whistle like you hail a cab. Who here can do it? Someone. Yes, all over the place. It is going on. And my spouse will tell you what a difference it makes to have people cheering you on, especially at the 23rd mile, but anywhere along the way. Now, some scholars think that Luke was written as a very specific type of Greek philosopher biography, in which the first section tells about the wonder workings of the philosopher, and the second part, which is the book of Acts, in the case of our Bible, tells what the followers of the philosopher did with his teachings. Namely, they created a mutual aid and burial society that was open to all. Now, according to ChatGPT, there have been something like 80 generations since Jesus was alive. That means we are in the 80th section of the book of Luke. And each of those sections of the book of Luke has carried the knowledge of the cross and all that it entails. In this room, there are people, or just a generation removed, of knowing what it is to have to pass for something that they're not in order to be safe. A forced migration of disappearing. There are people in this room who see the suitcase that Marcel Duchamp made in 1940 as the Nazis advanced upon Paris so that his whole life's work could fit into one suitcase of miniatures. There are people in this room who know by one generation removed of internment and slavery. And we know loss, we know heartache, we know failure and fear and longing, and how Rosemary Garland Thompson defines disability as the etchings on flesh as it encounters the world. There is the cross, to be sure. It is real, and God is with us in the midst of it. But there are 79 generations ahead of us in the book of Luke who know and testify that Rome had one plan, but as our reading from Acts reads today, but God had another. Victory is won, and fear and death are conquered. There are 79 generations of the faithful behind us, cheering us on in the moment. Now, some of them might be like my friend Lance's grandmother, who used to tell him, "Lance, you come down off that cross, someone else needs the wood." But I like to imagine more of them giving the whistle, cheering us on with signs and cowbells, that we can do what the generations have done before us in faith. That Rome had one plan, but God had another. And so we make sack lunches and clean up cots in the basement. We fall in love. We murmur psalms to those in hospice so that they might have a good death. We eat together and listen to each other. We do research into greater and greater discovery. We protect the dignity of every human being. And we'll gather together at 4 o'clock in Raymond Park next Sunday in interfaith prayers for the planet, because God loved this world and so do we. Jesus makes me proud to be a Christian, but being with all of you, with 79 generations cheering behind us, helping us remember not just about Jesus' life, but that Rome had one plan and God had another, and that we have seen the resurrection, that is what gives me hope in the marathon. For Christ is risen indeed above every fear that ever has been. Amen.